Okay, so hopefully you just viewed the video of the chimp attacks. Now we're going to look at bonobos, and they're really different from chimps in that they don't wage war. They don't show proactive aggression like that. They're peaceable at that level. They show no planned strikes, and they don't demonstrate infanticide. When it comes to reactive aggression, bonobos show similar kinds of contact fighting, but at a much reduced frequency compared to chimps. They show relatively less overall, although female bonobos show more than female chimps, interestingly. And female alliance groups, in fact, control male bonobos, which is not thought to be replicated elsewhere. By contrast, male chimpanzees constantly aggress against female chimpanzees. So bonobos don't attack other groups in coordinated, planned ways like chimpanzees. Wrangham notes that only one other species produces similarly high death rates from intergroup aggression compared to chimpanzees' surprise attacks on neighboring social communities. That group is us, humans, although we are also remarkably cooperative across great distances. The human comparison group used for non-human species is typically nomadic human hunter-gatherers. Here are 3 Hadza hunter-gatherers in a YouTube demonstration assembling a hut. Tribes around the world have been observed for many decades. So patterns of aggression and violence and cooperation outside modern market economies and political systems has been observed and understood from an evolutionary perspective. And one thing is clear, intra and intergroup violence is actually rare, and by and large it's of the planned type and not the result of escalating battles. That is, compared with our closest relatives, although we show cultural variation, the rate of reactive aggression in humans is much lower than chimpanzees and bonobos. This major reduction in contact fighting is widely hypothesized to be due in part to anatomical changes in the brain that allowed increased behavioral regulation via top-down control, prefrontal cortex control. In turn, it likely also increased proactive aggression in the form of planned punitive systems and war as opposed to reactive aggression. This differing set of ratios is also thought to be the result of cultural influences, which we'll hear a lot about in Joe Henrich's work in the second part of this lecture. He talks about how the simultaneous evolution of institutions like punishment systems and markets and religion, these all introduce widely accepted consequences and norms for behavior. These practices would need bootstrapping from biological affordances like prefrontal cortex control, and it's hypothesized that biological and cultural evolution proceeded in tandem, and we'll look more at that in Henrich's work. Notably, as a contrast to the dual approach to violence, Adrian Raine, a neuroscientist and criminologist, describes an evolutionary view of violence that is unitary. This perspective presents violence at its most fundamental level as a way to gain resources. This evolutionary approach also asks that you adopt the perspective specifically of early male ancestors. This is based around the fact that men commit more acts of physical violence, serious violence that result in arrest and injury on the public record. Evolutionarily, the story is that men pursue resources in order to compete with men to attract women. Why? More resources confers status and a greater ability to attract fertile female partners. With them, the men can most effectively reproduce their genetic material. The evolutionary story, of course, is that women likewise are interested in men with resources, then status, who signal they'll protect their future children and together will reproduce their genetic material. So violence and aggression, from an evolutionary perspective in Adrian Raine's view, is a means to the end, the same end, the goals that make you desirable and able to dominate your foes. Raine argues that we see this process in defensive aggression, that reactive type, in bar fights, prison brawls, bullying, sports fights, in the various ways that people fight to establish dominance and attempt to put down rivals. Here, this competition with rivals for desirable partners, this is not the stuff of proactive violence. It is considered closer to reactive violence. Raine notes that as much as violence is punished in our society, aggression, violence, and dominance is also a major source of social status. He theorizes that violence allows mostly men to acquire money, esteem, respect among other men and women, and it also deters aggression from others. This observation aligns with the research that we'll discuss next in PNAS that proposes that an evolutionary perspective can explain the different functions of testosterone. And it indicates that the social understanding of the role of testosterone in human behavior actually needs some modification. Namely, long-held assumptions about testosterone as a driver of aggression are likely too general. The picture is more nuanced. If you recall, we discussed how there seems to be remnants of a north-south regional difference in attitudes about aggression and violence. There's disagreement about what's legitimate force or excessive violence when defending your home, for example. Such attitudes they vary regionally. When Nisbet and Cohen took these studies to the lab, we saw that Southerners, as indicated on this graph in the red line, they experience a bump up in testosterone after being insulted, and this was significantly larger than in the case of Northerners, who are in the blue line. And this was interpreted as showing that Southerners experienced a heightened aggressive response, consistent with Southerners' increased allowances for more severe violence in general. This effect was when these individuals were provoked through insult in line with reactive violence. But others have argued that besides its role in sexual characteristics, testosterone is not all about aggression and violence. Others have posited that just like it's been posited regarding the dual nature of violence, testosterone-driven behaviors could have a dual nature, driving both outcomes that are ultimately pro-social and antisocial. Why? Because testosterone is a sex hormone contributing to reproduction, and as such, it increases status-increasing behaviors, whatever they may be in a particular context, pro-social or antisocial. So this status-centric view of testosterone was put forth in this PNAS paper, where the hypothesis is that testosterone-driven behavior in human males is either of a prosocial or antisocial nature. And this is because, as a sex hormone aiming to spread the organism's genes, it's motivating behaviors that increase status, whatever they might be. And they present the results of an experiment that tested two claims related to these evolutionary arguments. And these have implications for understanding the biological basis of violence. Their hypotheses were, one, that testosterone increases status-relevant aggressive behaviors, like reactive aggression. And 2, that testosterone increases non-aggressive behaviors that increase status, like generosity to others. To examine these hypotheses, they recruited 40 participants who were healthy young males who were injected with testosterone or a placebo in a double-blind between subjects randomized design. Participants played a modified version of the ultimatum game, and this is the workhorse economic game that we encounter in many of the readings. It was modified so that having accepted or rejected an offer from the proposer, participants then had the opportunity to punish or reward the proposer at a proportionate cost to themselves. Specifically, participants always assumed the role of the responder and were paired with proposers, who they were told were playing with fixed amounts to choose from for proposals. Every trial began with the presentation of the image of a proposer and the offer to split a sum of money, shown in text, and using a colored horizontal bar, where the proportion that's colored yellow indicates the proportion of the sum that is being offered to that responder. So the responder has to choose, accept or reject this offer. If the responder chooses to accept, that sum of money is divided according to the offer. If the responder chooses to reject, the sum of money is returned to the experimenter. Participants are given the opportunity to punish or reward the proposer for that offer. They can increase or decrease the proposer's payout for the trial, and they can also choose to do nothing. So they could both choose to pay a small cost to give a punishment to the other player, or they could choose to reward the other player for pro-social offers. They would specify the magnitude of their punishment or reward, and it was costly to punish. Finally, participants were shown their net winnings and those of the proposer for each trial. The researchers found that participants who were treated with testosterone were more likely to punish the proposer. That was costly punishment. Higher testosterone levels were specifically associated with increased punishment of proposers who made unfair offers. So they became more like unfairness police. Testosterone potentiated aggressive responses to provocation in the form of an unfair offer. Further, importantly, when participants who received treatment with testosterone received large, generous offers from a proposer, they were more likely to reward them, and their rewards were of a greater magnitude. So testosterone triggered more pro-social behavior that's appropriate for increasing status. They became like a big tipping status influencer. The authors conclude that the evidence indicates testosterone supports a range of behaviors that increase status in males. Genes don't make evaluations, including moral evaluations, of the proximal behaviors that allow them to reproduce. The inference here is that genes shape biology, and here in particular the hormone testosterone, which then shapes behavior in whatever relevant way will make that person maximally successful in transferring their genes to the next generation. Again, we see that cooperation, pro-social behavior, and aggression are not exactly antithetic, but share a close relationship, and they drive reciprocal cooperation not only in tight-knit groups, but also among human strangers. So how did humans make the jump from these kinds of reciprocity and kinship-based relationships to often successfully managing large-scale transactions with strangers all around the world, people who they don't know and who might even have divergent goals and wishes?